Hi everybody and welcome to everyone, not just here in Australia, but everyone who's zooming in from around the world. We have just shy of 2,000 people in the room with us virtually and physically for this event this evening, which is pretty great. So we are literally touching all points of the compass, which is great. So we're in the centre of something. Something is happening here. This is the first event of a major international speaker series, the UTS Global Game Changers series, that is being hosted here at UTS. And the whole idea of the series is to tackle the issues that matter most today. And you can imagine across the campus, there are lots of different opinions about what matters most today. Yeah, from the sciences, engineering, and all the rest. But tonight we're talking about green infrastructure. But I'll get to that in just a second. The first thing I would like to do, the way I would like to start proceedings here, is with an acknowledgement of country. And to acknowledge the ancient land upon which we are standing. I always find this is a really serious thing. I mean, as an architect or someone who's studied architecture, I think a lot about place and where we are and how important context is. So when I do these acknowledgements of country, it always makes me stop, just for a second, to think, okay, this place, it's been around for a while. I'm only a newcomer here, and there are people who have a lot of knowledge about where we are. So it's a customary thing here in Australia to pay respects to the land and to the people who have lived here for thousands of years at the beginning of any important gathering, and this is most certainly an important gathering. And as I said before, today we've got all of us in the auditorium here in the UTS Great Hall, and we have everyone with us online. For those of us who are here in person, and for the many hundreds of viewers watching internationally, the welcome to country, or the acknowledgement of country, this extends to everybody, and welcome to everybody. And so in honour of this great land and its ancient traditions and people, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and to pay my respects to the elders both past and present. It's a little bit of one of those things. It's taken us a long time to listen to that knowledge and that wisdom, but we are listening and we are learning, so that is wonderful. Right, so we're here to talk about green cities. Green cities, and I hear you say, what is that? I'm going to get to that in just a moment. The first thing I want to do is introduce these lovely people that are up here on stage with me, and our best friend, Remy, who's over there. He lives in Nairobi, which is his normal domicile, but he's currently in Frankfurt doing important UN business. But I'll get to Remy in a second. First, I want to introduce Rob Stokes, who's here on stage. Rob, welcome. Round of applause for Rob. You know the name. Yes, you know the name. You know the man. Leading Australian spokesman on city planning and the importance of net zero cities. Former New South Wales Minister for Planning and Public Spaces. Boy, that was a job. Yeah, boy, life after that, hey? It's good, huh?
Yeah, it's a lot more comfortable now.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
And passionate about beauty in people, nature and urban spaces. So I'm now thinking of Rob as our poet in politics. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks.
Right here on this end of the seats is Yua Chillers. She is a global leader in urban planning and green infrastructure solutions. She's also the professor of urban planning and head of the School of the Built Environment here at UTS. She runs the school, which is why she's so busy. And she's known, and this is a funny story behind this one, but she's known as a defender of the future. Now, just sit with that for a second. This is what a defender of the future looks like, everyone. I think we're in good hands. Don't you think? Yes. Jermaine Briand is here with us also, sitting in the centre here. Yeah, woohoo! He's an innovative entrepreneur, and he connects nature to city environments. He's the owner and director of the Urban Canopy Australia, and he's on a mission to reconnect people with nature. So he's the entrepreneur bridge builder, and his whole job is to give us the pathway back to nature, which I think is a great job to have. Thank you for joining us. And zooming in with us on the big screen here, this very impressive looking gentleman here who's 6 foot tall, and we're only seeing him from the shoulders up, Remy Sichaping. He's an international strategist on urban planning and geographic information systems. He's a community educator, and he is also the Chief of Policy at UN Habitat, the United Nations Human Settlements Program in Africa. Remy, welcome to you.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
All right, so what is green infrastructure? I'm going to take a little second here just to sort of set the scene, and then my learned colleagues over here are going to take the conversation away, and my whole job is just to keep them talking, but I think they're going to do a great job of that on their own. What I want to do firstly is I just want you to close your eyes. Just for a second, close your eyes. Now imagine the perfect city street in your mind's eye, the perfect city street. Give yourself a second to form that image, yeah? What's going on in that mind of yours? What are you seeing now? I bet the first thing you're seeing, you can open your eyes now, I bet the first thing you're seeing are the people around you, yeah? Give me a quick show of hands if I'm right, yeah? The people, that's the first thing you notice? Oh, okay, about a couple of people. That's the first thing I think of. And I polled everyone in my family about that, and they all said, yeah, the people. What's the second thing you saw? I bet there were trees on the street. Yeah? Who had trees? Oh, okay, that's better. That's feeling a lot better. So isn't that interesting? That perfect city includes, well, okay, let's put trees at the top of the pile. Trees is one of those things which are the first thing you think of when you think of a city. Now think of downtown Sydney, or downtown any city for that matter, and think of how many trees you can count in that mind's eye of yours. Not as many as you'd like, right? Am I right? So, with that thought in mind, that perfect idea in mind, and now I'm reading this, so excuse me for reading. Urban green infrastructure refers to all of the vegetation that provides environmental, economic and social benefits, such as clean air and water, climate regulation, food provision, erosion control and places for recreation. Green infrastructure includes urban parks and reserves, wetlands and stream corridors, street trees and roadside verges, gardens, vegetable patches, bikeways, pedestrian trails, wall and rooftop gardens, orchards, farms, cemeteries, and derelict land. That's a lot, don't you think? These aren't my words. This is coming from the CSIRO. So this is the definition that we as a research community would probably defer to as what is green infrastructure. But I think you can see from just that it is very encompassing, yeah? Includes a lot. And as you can imagine, that idea of green cities with all of those different components requires enormous expertise across a broad swathe of not just the university campus, but across all of our disciplines, ranging from planning, landscape architecture, horticulture, ecology, what else have we got? Psychology, engineering and policy, and that's just for starters. Basically, as we know, cities are big, complex animals, and they're very hard to tame. They're very hard to direct. They're very hard to kind of point in a direction that we know is better because cities kind of have a mind of their own because there are a lot of people involved. So with that kind of situation in front of us, let me tell you a little bit about why some of the benefits of green infrastructure that are there to sort of, not so much tame the city, but to orient it in a better direction for our future. Some of those benefits, are things like, now I'm just thinking actually, before I give you that, I'm thinking, I'm about to list a few things for you, but really these aren't nice to have things. These are really need to have things in our future cities. So this kind of list of want to haves is actually, no, these are the things we must do for our cities going into the future. So with that in mind, sustainability. Green infrastructure gives us cooler streets, management of heat island effects, flood and stormwater management, cleaner waterways and air, drought tolerance, and lower building and energy needs. And that's just sustainability for a starter. Public health, better air quality, better water quality, cooler and calmer streets and neighbourhoods, social benefits that bring us outside, that reconnect us to nature, that one's going to Jermaine, allows humans to use the city again. Again, that perfect city we're all imagining, that's the one where we're all outside. We're all outside on the street. We're probably in some Parisian cafe sitting on a street corner having a cup of coffee, but we're outside, we're with other people, and we're enjoying the ambience of being there, yeah? And biophilia. And biophilia, if you haven't heard that expression, it's basically that feeling you get of wellness and goodness when you are with greenery, when you are with nature. There's a science behind this, and I'm not going to go into it now, but basically you know that when you look at a tree, you feel better. The other day I heard a stat that if you spend 7 seconds, I think it was, looking at the ocean, you start to feel better. Just 7 seconds of watching the waves will actually physiologically calm you down and make you start to feel better in your whole body. physically and emotionally, yeah? So that's biophilia. That's our connection with nature. So that's just another one of those benefits. Costs. Now, this is the one where everyone goes, oh, yeah, but that's going to cost a fortune. Why would we do that? It's just way too expensive. Not true at all. Think about it like this. You spend a lot of money, billions of dollars, putting in freeways, and what do you get for that? You get people and cars moving from A to B and back again. Now, think about putting in something like a stream that deals with stormwater, cleans the stormwater, gives people a place to walk, somewhere for my dog to go for a walk. All these benefits of health and things that I've just mentioned, these are all the add-ons that these infrastructures, give you. So you pay for one and you get 10. Yeah? So the cost-benefit analysis, the research is still really being done, but all the indicators are that you're getting such better bang for your buck in a green infrastructure rather than the kinds of grey infrastructure that we're used to talking about when we talk about the city. So keep that in mind. I also heard somewhere that a treed street in a Sydney suburb will put $50,000 on the sale price of a property on that street, something like that. Oh yeah, now I've got your attention, haven't I? Yeah, okay, hi. Thanks for coming, Sydney. So, with that in mind, the last thing I wanted to mention too is aesthetics. Now, I'm a professor of architecture, so I dig aesthetics. I think they're important. I think how beautiful things look is an important thing for us to think about. When we talk about aesthetics in terms of green infrastructure, it's back to that vision of the city that you first started with. Yeah, the one that's in your mind, you go, yeah, of course it's a beautiful place. You don't want to go and hang out in an ugly place. You want to go and hang out somewhere that makes you feel good and visually that entices you to some kind of ownership almost. You want to feel connected to something that has that beauty for it. Now, you define beauty in your own way, but that idea of beauty and aesthetics is a part of the green infrastructure, and that's why we think of green trees and so on when we think of a beautiful city. All right. Now, this is an intensely local and a global phenomenon. 68% of the global population are expected to live in urban areas by 2050, according to the UN. Thank you, Remy. And in Australia, for those international people who are zooming in, it might surprise you to learn that here in Australia, 73% of us already live in the major cities across Australia. So this is a big issue, and it's one that will have effects, whatever we end up doing, it will have effects at a very large, dare I say, planetary sort of scale. So these moves we're making now are not insignificant. They are really big issues. So with that, that's enough from Anthony. With that now, I want to sort of take the conversation to the esteemed panel that we're here to talk with today. And you get the first question. Given all those wonderful benefits that green infrastructure seems to obviously provide us, why is it taking us so long to implement green infrastructure in our cities?
Really great question, Anthony. I think that is what all of us are shouting. Why aren't we not doing this? I think 3 reasons from my side. The first one is it's really inconvenient, right? We've been used to business as usual, and we know how to plan cities, and we know how to build the buildings. And now you're asking us to do it differently? Yeah. Really? Yeah. It's really inconvenient.
Yeah.
So we tend to just go with business as usual. Yeah, right? So there's a part of that, right? We are challenging how we think about cities and nature and how we plan everything from the start to the end. Second thing for me is a lack of leadership, policies, legislation, things enforcing this, but also people standing up and saying, hey, we should be doing this, right? It's not a nice to have, it's a necessity, as you said. So 0.3% of urban infrastructure budgets goes to green infrastructure or nature.
Just say that again, how much?
0.3%. Remy, you can check me if I'm quoting incorrectly. 0.3% of all urban infrastructure budgets goes to greening or nature-based solutions, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So we need collective leadership to say this should change, right? So this for me is the second thing. And then the third thing is really those benefits that you called out. I really think we don't understand the value of nature and what it means for us as individuals and for our cities. I think we almost take it for granted, but we've never lived in an urbanized world that it is today, and we are losing greening across all our cities. Yeah. So we're going to lose these great benefits. We are going to lose the medicine that you explained, right?
Yeah.
And so in a way, it's really to realize it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. And I had to throw in there, maybe it's because we haven't had it on grand designs yet. That's maybe why we're still
I'm
too
pushing
slow.
the buttons. So there's a teaching component here because the knowledge about the benefits are not being communicated. So that hasn't happened yet. Yeah. There's a leadership issue. Actually, that makes me think then, Rob. You've got a fabulous career and a deep knowledge of politics. In your mind, is this green infrastructure question a technical question or is it a cultural question?
It's entirely cultural. And when you started with that beautiful acknowledgement of country, part of acknowledgement is acknowledging that we have imported ontologies, ways of knowing, laws, cultures from the other side of the world and just imagined that we can somehow translate them into an entirely different context and completely ignored the people who had lived here continuously since the dreaming.
Yeah.
And so we instinctively at some level are scared of nature. A more recent British visitor to Australia, Bill Bryson, the travel writer, said the thing about Australia is everything's trying to kill you. And there's a sort of sense that, we've got to control our gardens or our environment because it will make it safer that way. I mean, of the top 4 selling plants in Australian nurseries, you've got a type of ornamental privet, you've got English box, you've got Leighton greens, otherwise known as spiked trees, because they're there to block out the neighbours. And there's one native that makes the list. It's a Syzygium, it's a lily-pilly. It's called No More Neighbours. And so our entire, the way we think about nature is how to exclude others and how to make it neat and tidy and ornamental so it doesn't get in the way. Nature's messy and we want to make sense and control of our lives. And, that's a great thing about a lawnmower. It's your little bit of, exerting control over nature. I mean, the nature strip, there's nothing natural about it. It's a bit of lawn. So it's entirely cultural. Yeah. And I was fascinated during my time in politics. I remember once, actually, I spoke at something and I got in a lift and they'd given me a little tree as a gift. It was lovely. And I got in the lift in Parliament and there are a bunch of parliamentarians there, probably a little bit more right-wing, and they said to me, Stokesy, what do you got there? And I said, it's a little tree. It's a baby tree. What are you going to do with it? I was kind of getting a bit intimidated at this point, and I said, I'm going to plant it. I said, why would you do that? And it'll get stuck in your drains, and then you'll be sorry. And but it's just a little baby tree. Anyway, but there's that mentality. There's something scary or that needs to be controlled, and it comes from this colonial settler mindset that's still very much there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what do you think then about Yua's point about leadership, though?
Yeah.
Do you agree with Yua?
Entirely. There's leadership that's, what's that old saying in, the series Yes Minister? That was courageous. There's doing courageous things that are career limiting, and the clever things are the incremental change that that you can get away with. COVID was an amazing time to do things that you could get away with because we trialled, for example, like bike lanes. Yep. I was amazed. You try and put a motorway in Sydney and, there's a little bit of resistance, but most people go, we need to get where we're going faster. Try to build a bike lane, everyone goes absolutely bananas. Yeah. But in COVID, we were able to just put them in and say, they're temporary, and then just left them there.
Yeah.
That was the plan.
Right.
Can I chip in? Leadership, I call it leadership because there's good examples globally where we do get this right? And so there is some world cities that do get that right, or individuals. So it's not like everybody's lost, but it's a leadership and it's a standing up for it and pushing through with it.
That is a perfect segue to Remy. You with us, Remy?
Yes, I am. I hope you can hear me.
Oh, that's great. Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. I want to throw that question then to you and ask, this idea of green infrastructure, from your perspective, as the UN, you are our UN representative here, do you think of it as a global issue or a local issue?
Well, thanks a lot. I believe that global is also local. Everything that happens globally affects things locally and vice versa. So within, I can hear some echoes, but I hope it's okay. Within the framework under which we are operating, the Sustainable Development Goals, if you look through, Many of them actually touch on infrastructure, on the environment, on resilience, all the topics that we're going to cover here. So it's an issue of global relevance. If you take one dimension, which is climate change that we are all familiar with, we know that we are witnessing how it manifests itself. And this was not, we still had some denials around, but 30, 40 years ago, that was not the issue. So sometimes push comes to shove, and then we have to reckon with. But I just want to take us a little bit back. I don't know, you might have read the great book by Jared Diamond, The Collapse, How Society Chooses to Fail or Succeed. In that book, for those who have not read, you will understand that we are not, many of the societies actually had neglected the value, the benefits of nature, and turned into consumerism rather than living with that nature in a more, symbiotic manner. And that had come to a cost. And today we are also facing similar situations. And I know that we already mentioned the importance when culturally, I think Rob had clearly indicated, it's mainly cultural, I agree, because nature-based solutions are not easily, reflected. People cannot relate easily, and Prof. Hua had mentioned. But the element of beauty, aesthetic that Anthony, you mentioned, is also relative. It's subjective, but still we have some common threads that we can look at. We don't know if green is actually a good sign for everybody. In some people, green is not good. In some cultures, it's not good, but in other, it's actually a sign of aesthetic, of reconnecting with your place and nature. But I just want to also add the element of heritage. Nature is heritage because that's why we talk about tangible and intangible heritage. And until we bring all these things together in terms of nature as part of our common human heritage, then we continue struggling. One example, just to illustrate the point, is during the COVID-19, it must still be fresh in our mind. Green space or parks were the most sought after spaces because this was one of the unique environment where we can practice more social distancing while enjoying nature. Those who were suffering from COVID were, encouraged to have some elements of sun, of green spaces and clean air. All these things are important. But globally, one of the unintended consequences of COVID was that the untouched nature, you know, the humanly less impacted environment actually grew. It was a positive thing for the nature globally that actually some plants, some areas recovered. Just to say that nature is there and we have to nurture, we have to do our best to live with that and keep nature as one of our best friends if you were to be the champions and be the champion of the future, as Professor Jua had just said, and who she is. So let me stop here just to say that this conversation is very important and globally very relevant.
I'm not going to let you off the hook just yet because what you're saying is, yes, it's an everyone problem. It's a global problem, global solutions. That is a common humanity that we're talking about here. We all fell back in love with our local parks when COVID came along, no matter where you were on the planet. But the other side to your answer there was to let us in on the idea, and this is the challenge, I suppose, that it's a different conversation in different cultures, and it has to be. So the common ground we're looking for, maybe that just doesn't exist.
No, it does actually. Just give you an example. Who would not like to have some form of a green, some I don't know, plants. I think Rob had mentioned some energy efficiency, managing your waste differently, or managing your water differently, having a bit of veggie garden, got something that you have grown and you could actually eat or enjoy and see that grow. So that type of habit exists everywhere. So there are some commonalities in actually taking action locally. Of course, if you live in an ecological unique space, could be desert and all that, it might be different, but it must still be native plant, native environment that can, because greening is not only where you have plants. You can still create the ambience. I saw a business, we have German here, he can pick some of these ideas, where they were actually trying to create, the digital twins, and try to create now the environment that mimic nature, just to keep that our mind, our culture closer to nature. It might be artificial. We are quite familiar this day with artificial plants or artificial other things. But just to bring that type of element of nature back in our living environment, even artificially, is a step towards that. So I believe that ecologically they may adapt, but they must still be very, very relevant. Nature exists everywhere, regardless.
All right,
And culture it varies, but always important.
I'm going to say from policy then to product. Jermaine, this is you now, because you're the innovator and the bridge builder, right? You're the one who's responsible for, in some way, landing these grandiose ideas literally in the city. So where do you see the problems and where do you see the opportunities?
Yeah, thanks. I couldn't help myself to nod so much when you were talking there. I think the problem starts here. There's that great quote from that American anthropologist called Gregory Bateson that says most of the problem we see in the world today comes from the difference between the way people think and the way nature works. Nature works in ecosystem. We work in silos. Nature brings so many benefits to our cities. That is great. But in the way we currently work, it is also an issue because different people are responsible for different outcomes in our cities. Yet when you're talking about a solution that is all-encompassing, you end up with a problem. Because who's going to look after that? Oh, no, it's your thing. Well, no, I thought it was your thing. No, we're not going to do that. It's too complicated because it's holistic. Because it's going to mean the landscape architect is going to talk to the architects, it's going to need to talk to the planners, it's going to need to talk to the bicycle people, and everybody in between. You've got social groups or ethnic groups in Australia, huge diversity in our cities. Some ethnic groups don't like nature so much. There's even people, if ever you guys have heard that word, it's called dendrophobia. And dendrophobia means fear of trees. Some people are scared of trees. They run in the other direction. That exists.
Yeah.
Check
Rob just told us they get in your drains, right? So we've got to be aware of those.
No, but that's more
trees.
visceral type of fear. But the point is, nature is complex and it works in ecosystem. We work in silos, and for as long as we're not going to learn to do that, and that's so pertinent in the context of local and state government, where I see it in my work every day when I try to talk about bringing nature. The people who work in the sustainability department don't talk to the urban planner, don't talk to the placemakers, don't talk to the landscape architects. They're all doing their things in their own corners. And so that's not going to work. So until that happens. Now, to your point about being cultural, for sure, but this dates way back. The colonials, the British coming, that's Newtonian science. That's to make to make the world easier to understand for us humans, we make it more simple. We put it into boxes. And even to academia. In academia, you've got different faculties. And a PhD is so narrowly focused on one point where it could so much benefit from being in partnership with other parts of university. When this type of thinking starts being applied at university.
I'm so glad he's saying this because I'll have a moment to market the Green Infrastructure Lab that's very transdisciplinary.
That's right. No, I'm talking to you because I know you understand.
I know he knows.
The Vice-Chancellor is listening, just so you know. Great.
That's right.
We both know
But
that.
the risk with this is as well.
No, and I'm talking about university models in general, obviously not pointed to.
But the risk with that as well is the more complex, the more knowledge we get, the even more focused on little things, and the more likely we are to miss the bigger picture because we're focused, because our knowledge is getting more and more granular. So it's a real challenge.
We need to embrace complexity.
All right, so, but let's get to the part where you've got all green lights, and all those planners and policymakers and everyone's green lights. Yeah,
no pun intended.
You like that? I just worked that one in there. What is it exactly that you are putting into our cities? I mean, from a product point of view, what is this infrastructure that we're literally talking about? Yes, we're talking about trees, but we're talking about now businesses, and we're talking about a whole kind of raft of perhaps a new industry that's emerging to do this sort of work. What exactly does that mean to you?
Well, there's new challenges now with climate change. We've got a challenge of our cities warming up. This didn't exist before. Oh, okay. So, when cities were designed, nature was a nice ornamental thing.
Yep.
But we just put there because it looks nice, and we know that people like nature. We'll touch on biophilia, but this was the sole purpose of nature. Now we're like, oh shit, that actually is the best aircon. And it's natural, and it has so many other benefits.
Yeah.
Yet, our cities were not designed to plant more trees. Our cities were designed with a lot of hard infrastructure. And the challenge is, when you're talking to engineers, they say, that tree there doesn't behave like a brick wall, does it? Oh, yeah, not too hard. That grows, and it grows this way and that way, and how do we deal with that? Too hard. And so the key is to try to find solutions that bring nature in the city in a predictable way. So it's about finding the best of both worlds.
Yeah, okay.
Right? In trying to bring nature in, so it ticks most of those boxes that a tree would.
Yeah.
Maybe not all.
Yeah.
But it's easier to implement because it ticks the boxes of the people who design our cities.
All right, but at this point, I started off my bit up there at the lectern, all positive. Yeah, green cities, that's a beautiful future. Who doesn't want that, right? I want to walk near a waterway with my dog. And now at this point, you're all agreeing that this is too big a holistic problem for anyone to solve. And I'm starting to get depressed. Yeah? Should I be feeling this way? I mean, give me some hope here.
No, there is so much that has already happened. The question is, can it happen quick enough?
Right.
You look, for example, some people might be, in this audience might be old enough to remember when you could literally, I came, when you could, I grew up in Sydney's Northern Beaches, I remember when you could actually smell the sewage coming out of North Head. It was just this, and the water was filthy, and we've solved that problem. I remember
I used to surf at Queenscliff,
Oh,
and
yes.
I remember that, exactly what you're saying.
And when in certain winds you just wouldn't go there, you'd get an ear infection, it just wasn't worth it. Although it would get you out of school, but and equally, like leaded petrol in our cars, that was genuinely, I remember the smoke haze that was every day over Sydney. So on some things, we've demonstrated capacity to solve these problems if we act collectively. Yeah. The problem is the things that is in everyone's interest collectively is often not in everyone's interests individually. Sure. And so there'll always be particular stakeholders who'll have a reason why, that doesn't suit me. And so it's so easy to stop change, and you do need a certain level of courage to continue. And sometimes you'll go 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but at least that's 1 step forward. Yeah. And then you just got to keep going. I mean, I remember when I was in government, we had an abortive attempt with a thing called the Design and Place State Environmental Planning Policy, which was basically, we wanted to start the design principle. Like our cities actually, when you look at it, respectfully, aren't designed by architects. Architects come in right at the end. They're actually designed by land surveyors who have no design training whatsoever. And we just said, well, why don't we start with country? Because we'd listened to some Aboriginal planners who had told us there's incredible things, there's incredible knowledge that no one's actually bothered to ask many Aboriginal elders about land, about songlines, about the country itself. And to start with an understanding of that knowledge, well, why wouldn't we? But that particular reform proved too difficult to get over across the line. But there are some elements of that did happen, and inevitably it set a course that ultimately those changes will come to pass. But one thing that we tried to do was ensure that in new subdivisions in Western Sydney, for example, where we know that a non-reflective roof will actually increase internal temperatures by about 10 degrees in summer, like 10 degrees. And so, in other words, it'll require really expensive mechanical ventilation to deal with that problem in households struggling with cost of living. So if you just made the roofs a light colour, you would save a huge amount of energy. But the property developer stakeholders were, oh no, we couldn't possibly do that because people don't want light coloured roofs. And I'm like, well, that's just silly. Yeah. But nevertheless, that change wasn't able to.
It's back to the cultural question. It's a cultural thing.
Yeah. In Victoria, they've done it. So good on Victoria.
We can do it. Yeah. I was going to come back to you because at this point, you said leadership before, and I'm wondering in your mind then what unlocks us from this, I'm going to call it an impasse, but Rob's given me hope. So what unlocks us from this moment where it's too big a problem, I can't do anything? What do you think? What is the research actually telling us?
So I think this, like the amount of people signing up for these events, tell you that people's realising this is what we should be doing. Yeah. We see interest from our PhD students coming in saying, I want to do research in sustainable urban development / green infrastructure, because the younger generation knows this is where it's going. This is what we should be doing. So there's a big push coming. But I think collectively, you have a stronger voice. If we can all be saying the same stories, that leadership voice gets stronger. The research, I mean, you called out that benefits. I think one of our science friends is here, and he often say, the research shows it's too good to be true. Like, if you know how good nature is, you would not believe it.
Yeah.
Like, it's too good to be true, but we've neglected that. So we need to be saying these stories more, piloting things, showing, and then pushing collectively for the policies and for the leadership to make the right decisions, to do this. If we don't do it now, fast forward 10 years from here, nobody of us would want to live in Sydney or any city for that matter.
Yeah, so there is a question of pace. We need to pick up the pace. We've got to find the structure to allow us to do that. That's what I'm sort of picking up from the conversation. Remy, I'm going to come to you. You're checking your emails. No. Remy. Oh, you're making notes. Sorry, there you go. I knew you were. So we're sort of talking about this from I guess, a culture meets politics and leadership point of view. From the UN's point of view, what would you say was the biggest priority in the green infrastructure space? Just give me one that is the probably top of the pile for the priorities from the UN's perspective.
Well, from us, I think the word had been said, what we call nature-based solution. So whatever solutions we are bringing in cities, if they are nature-driven, nature-oriented. For instance, let's say we are bringing some, because I would like to bring these elements of green, grey, and blue infrastructure. When you have this blend all the time, because when you look at the grey infrastructure, usually the green element is very, very, sometimes insignificant. So if you assume in our tender in the city or something like that, that any infrastructure in a city should have at least 30%. I like 30% because we use that in many of our standards and guidelines of green. That would actually set up what we discussed earlier in terms of policy regulations and enforceable, because you have a threshold and that can be measured. The same way when you talk about, we mentioned the managing drainage or stormwater, because if permeable space, pathways or, all these spaces had to be made more, create spaces for blending the blue and then the green. It's important. So for us, nature-based solution is key, and it's also one tool that we use for climate management. I'm saying management because we can talk about resilience, adaptation, and other measures. So nature is really important, and as I mentioned earlier, when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, they have been prioritized. They are all over those 17 goals. So very clear that for us, there's no just one, but several entry points that we use to actually bring that element of planet, people, and places together. And I have other P's that I will be, coming, adding to this piece to demonstrate how what German was talking about, the ecosystem that we are working with. But don't be depressed. There are many, many good examples out there. There are many possible solutions. There are many things we can do in our own capacity. Doesn't matter who you are, at city level, in our homes, in our global engagement. When we have a voice like this one, you can carry. So there are so many things. I know we're gonna get there, but let's not get depressed. Let's get excited rather that there is a consciousness.
Yeah.
That is emerging.
Yeah, round of applause for that.
And we
I
have
think
to
that's
tap
worth
into
it.
that.
And can I just point out, Remy, that you are here as wearing the SDG goals pin,
And Rob's is at
which
home.
has all the colours there for the goals. So it's going to change the tone a little bit here for a second, because we've talked about policy, we've talked about some of the hurdles. I want to kind of just flip the script a bit. And one thing that you said, Rob, when we were speaking at some point earlier, you brought in the idea of beauty. Now, so here's the poet, politician moment for you, okay? I'm setting you up here, right? So I really want to understand why and how we should talk about beauty in this context.
It's funny, isn't it, beauty? Because it's not something we tend to talk about. It's sort of, it was only post-politics that I sort of reflected on the things that mattered to me, and I realised I care about beautiful things. I love trees. It's something, when I see a tree knocked over, I just don't like that. And I imagine that's something that many people identify with. I think it's funny, with beauty, it's very hard to measure. You know it when you see it. And I think it's harder to tell what it is than it is to say what it isn't. You know, beauty in architecture can be monumental, it can be martial, magisterial, it can be modern. One of my favourite bits of architecture in the city is the mortuary. It can be quite morbid, but they're all human. What they share is something that is organic, and it is something that's warm, or there's fenestration, or there's something tangible or tactile that is human. The opposite of that, inhuman or non-human, that's very hard to be beautiful. And so I think there's something in that. I remember that...
Is it one of those things we can measure everything except the things that matter?
Yeah, that's a lovely way to put it. There's actually a fellow called William Morris who was an architect and an interior designer in Britain. He was the sort of parent of the arts and crafts style, and you can tell me more about him.
Oh no, go ahead. I'm listening. I'm loving it.
But he once was...
I've got to stand up. I'm so excited.
William
Morris, tell me arts and crafts. I'm all over this. I love what you've done with the place. How much did it cost? Sorry, Rob. Go on.
He had some really interesting politics too. We should chat about him later. But he and cottage industry was a phrase he coined because he hated the impact of industrialisation in dehumanising the countryside. So that was a sort of revolt against the dehumanising influence of industrialisation. And he once said, well, if you're looking for a golden rule, this is it. When you're acquiring anything, ask yourself, is it useful? Do you consider it beautiful? And I compare, and I think, so if we're asking that question in modern Australia, probably the questions are, is it big, is it cheap?
Yeah.
And I'm as guilty as anyone. Like when my wife sends me to Aldi to get some milk, I'll come back with an air compressor. Not because I
That centre aisle, right?
Yeah, that's
another one.
And I wouldn't know how to use an air compressor, and I don't know what I'd use it for anyway, but gosh, it was a good deal.
Yes.
So we're all infected a bit by this materialism of thinking something, we see preciousness not in the beauty or the utility of things, but in their, just some sort, we've got our idea of value all muddled up.
Yeah.
But beauty is still something that's innate to us and drives us and compels us. And interestingly, you look at environments that attract people, and they're beautiful places.
Yeah.
And so, and the secret of placemaking seems to me to be create something beautiful and people will be attracted to it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the secret sauce, isn't it? If you can find that kind of beauty that you're describing, people will love it, people will come to it, people will feel responsible for it, and that breeds sustainability, that breeds the longevity. So when we think about spending money at the front of a project on something which might, make it more attractive, and I mean that in both a kind of a metaphorical and a literal sense, actually there's a long sort of ripple effect of that. And that is ownership and that long sort of play that happens because of that.
Yeah, and on a poet, John Ruskin once said that to be beautiful, something has to be true.
Yeah.
And so this idea of authenticity as well, that something's not pretending to be something other than what it is.
Yeah.
And there's a beauty in that as well.
Absolutely.
But that humanity, and I know, certainly the ideas of something that's organic, there's beauty in something that seems to be living in some sense.
Let's throw then to Jermaine. And I know you're going to answer the organic question in a second and tell us how gorgeous it is.
I need to say.
So I'm waiting for that. But I'm also, in one of our previous conversations, you brought up the idea of love. So now I signed up for this panel thinking it's all about sustainability and it's about infrastructure. And now we've got this whole sort of, poetry coming out of the panel here, which I'm actually really enjoying, but it's not where I thought this conversation would go. But love, what do you mean? How does that figure?
Yeah, Dostoevsky said, "Beauty will save the world." And in Sydney, there's a beautiful example of that. It's called the Sydney Opera House. The Sydney Opera House costs, I think, 7 times the intended budget, but it's now paid for itself many times over. If you put beauty, if you put authenticity, if you put nature-led design, that's what you get. Now, talking about love.
Because it's just you and me here.
Yeah.
So go for it.
I must say, you look very nice tonight.
I think you look lovely too.
Okay, so this is the essence of why I do what I do. It is my belief that we see so much destruction out there of nature, which is destruction of ourselves, really, because we don't love nature enough, and arguably we don't love ourselves enough either. So there's 2 big problems here. But
hang on. What does the audience think about that? Do we love ourselves enough? Do we love nature enough? So in your minds, you're asking the question, which is the obvious follow-on, which is, how can I find a way to love nature more and therefore love myself more? Is this the kind of logic we're talking about? Is this where we're going?
Yeah.
I'm just summing up because, the job.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's that growing conversation about the fact that we humans are too many on this planet and we're cancerous. That's bad. I mean, there's no sports team that has won any type of tournament by starting saying, we're a bunch of losers. It doesn't work this way. Right, yeah. So now back to love.
Back to love.
Why we see so much destruction of nature in the world is because we don't love it enough. We don't love it enough because we don't value it enough, because we don't understand it enough, because we don't experience it enough. And therefore, we're disconnected from that web of life. Why do we do all the crazy things that we do for our families? Because all those boxes are ticked. Now, the rest of the living world is just extended family, right? Just a few more generations ago, right? So that's why I bring nature in the city, because I want people to experience nature more where they are, because not everybody is attuned to that going outdoors and reconnecting is important.
Yeah. Can I throw to Remy though at this point, because I'd love where this is. Excuse me again, love where this is going. But Remy, with your UN and especially your community hat on, can you maybe think of an example of the kind of thing that Jermaine's talking about, where that kind of commitment to something at a community level has led to something beautiful?
Yeah, well, there are several around us. I think this issue of experiencing and maybe appreciating what is there and do a bit more of that, and several places, that might be one way. But if you just look at botanic gardens, for instance, you have a few in some cities, but we need more. In a city like Sydney, I don't know if there's a plan to create more botanic gardens as the city grows, or at that level. So these are some of the places where we can reconnect, and people who visit, and we do that when we go to school. We take kids to botanic garden, to the zoo, to these places to get them reconnect because they start appreciating. So the idea here is to get the younger generation, the most younger one, to get interested because they are the future. So that would be my suggestions, that how do we get the kids to start learning the importance of green in the environment where they be living, where they live, so that it becomes part of their habit, their behavior, to break out that the issue we started with the culture, so that we don't try to unlearn and relearn later, so that it becomes part of our behavior, that this is just normal. We have to be able to bring nature anytime, every time, all the time.
Perfect. I mean, I think I was going to ask all of you, I'm going to ask all of you, just we're starting to run out of time, actually. I know, we're only really getting going. But that sounds to me like the question was, what's the one thing you would ask the audience to leave the room and do today or tomorrow to bring on the green infrastructure revolution that we're talking about? So I'm hearing from Remy, that I'm pointing down here to the monitor, that greening school playgrounds and places like that for our juniors is the right place to start. Let education start to play that role from a very young age, yeah? So the conversation starts early.
Yes, start as schools, at home, getting them involved, appreciating the plants, especially native plants, and also the one that has benefits, like the one that absorb more CO2, for instance. These are the things that we should be aware of and be able to plant them, because we know that type of benefits. The one that brings some elements of health, that have medicinal values, that have some fruits or some element. All those things, we have that element of culture, awareness, and knowing. And earlier enough, the better.
Getting your hands in the dirt. Rob, what's your one suggestion for people, the one thing that you would like people to do when they leave the room tonight?
Literally, the first thing that comes to my head, go for a walk, or get a mobility scooter. Just go and have a bit of a walk. 88% of our health budget, which is about 30% of the overall budget, is spent treating non-communicable diseases, of which the biggest single one is type 2 diabetes. There are more than 2.5 million Australians with that condition. And for most people, it's preventable if we just had environments where it was easier for people to just be a bit more active. Fantastic. So go for a walk.
Jermaine?
I'd like to bounce on what you were saying, Remy. I think, everyone in this room, and I think everyone, at some stage in our life, and for most of us, I think it's when we were kids, we've experienced wonder and awe of nature. It was like, wow, and to cross back on what you were saying, it's beautiful. And that transcends, it transcends our rational mind, just connects straight to our heart. And to me, this is why urban greening is so important, to have people experience that. Because this is so fundamental to the shift we need to operate as a species to live in harmony on this planet. There's that, we talk a lot about, hey, we need to save the planet. The planet doesn't need to be saved, it needs to be loved.
Ah, bravo. I think we can, that's it, that's a wrap. No, you are.
So I love this question because I once made my students do this, so this is a challenge to everybody. If you leave here, please go hug a tree. Love the tree. Hug the tree. Better even if you take a selfie while you hug the tree and you post it and you tag us. Post it, right? And if people ask you, why are you doing this?
That was so good. You just put that little plug in there.
I know, but if people ask you why, you give them this whole spiel about why nature is so valuable and so important, and why this tree is keeping us all alive, and help us spread the message and be a leader in that way.
Okay, very nicely summarised. Great. We've got time for just maybe 2, possibly 3 questions from our beautiful audience out here that's in the room with us. We've got some roving mics here. one there and one over there. So, oh my goodness, hands are shooting up all over the place. Let's go to this person here with the beautiful headscarf on. And if I could just ask you to keep the question pretty brief.
I loved what you said, Remy, and I agree with you. Community gardens, I think, in suburbs for children and herbs and fruit trees, and also not when children see the Balmoral trees being poisoned, they should get a bit more punished than they do.
Okay, so I'll take that as a comment. Great. Question, let's go. Yep, you had your hand up very quickly there in the second row. Yeah, with the dark black shirt. Here comes a microphone from over here. Yep. And I will go up the back, sorry.
Designing cities around water. So twice the amount of rain, twice the amount of water falls on Sydney than we actually draw out of Warragamba. If we didn't have Warragamba, if we were a city that needed to drink our own rain, what would that look like? What does a city look like that's designed around water?
What would a city look like if we had to design it around water? Who's going to answer that question?
I'll make a start. So we had to look at this question in looking at the new city around the new Western Sydney Airport and how to deal with water flow around South Creek, which is Wianamata, that big corridor. And it was originally a chain of ponds. So the idea, that the best advice that came back was to re-establish a chain of ponds. So that was, to recognise what was there before and seek to recreate that, and also to recognise we're going to have to start properly recycling water rather than just generating it through. We're going to have to get used to the idea that yes, we're going to drink our pee. We do it every day anyway, because it's ultimately, water. We've got the same amount of water in this biosphere as we've always had, so it's all recycled ultimately. And our piping systems, the idea of piping sewage and wastewater from far western Sydney out to the ocean is just a silly idea now.
Does anyone else want to tackle that question? Yeah, go on, Jermaine.
Well, yeah, I was more going to answer from a theoretical perspective. It doesn't work. It cannot work. Like, ideally, a city would operate in the same way as an ecosystem works. And an ecosystem deals with the amount of rainfall that falls there. It doesn't try to do stuff that is not afforded by the amount of sunlight that falls there and the amount of rain that falls there. And as such, a city in itself isn't a sustainable model. But that's a different conversation because we went too much down that track. But there's ways to make it better, but theoretically, it's really hard, really, really hard. But yeah, there's plenty of good initiatives to try to make buildings water positive, for example. How do you generate more water than you use? Like there's plenty of good initiatives out there, but it's a hard task, for sure.
All right, so that's a bit of a double-edged sword of an answer there. It's really hard, but we can do bits. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to go down. So I'm going to go down the back of the room here. Maybe up there, the gentleman with his hand up and the puffy vest on there.
Cool. So I got a bit of a housing question. And so urban sprawl in Western Sydney isn't sustainable or desirable in combating the housing crisis, like low canopy cover, dark roofs, car dependency. State government's moving towards more infill development and increasing density, as we've seen with the new TODCEP. And I guess that's the first half. And then, greening cities isn't a new concept. We have Canberra from the Garden City movement of the 20th century. Canberra, one of the downfalls of it is its lack of density, and this is seen as undesirable. And how do we combat how do we manage density in green cities is basically the question.
All right, so there's two parts to the question, I think. Firstly, are green cities, is green infrastructure a new idea? Short answer, yes or no?
No.
No? No. No. Remy, new idea? No, everyone's shaking their head. So, okay, not a new idea. We're all agreeing with you. The Garden City movement was one of the preemptive ones. The Griffins, they did it in Castle Crag. They wanted everyone to live in the bush. We had the mid-century moderns in the lower North Shore doing the nuts and berries architecture, which is all about living with the bush, not in the bush, but not digging up the bush. So we do have precedents. Clearly, though, we haven't been listening to them. The second part of the question is the density question. How do we reconcile green with density? These are both necessary, Who's going to tackle that one?
I'll have a shot. Just to say something a bit controversial, super high density, I don't see how that is ever ultimately sustainable. There's just too many challenges and too much energy use recurrent over time. And I think also, a strata titling works really well with a 1960s style six-pack of, six apartments. Once you got 500 or 1,000 apartments, strata, it becomes effectively a new form of governance entirely. And I worry what will happen in 50 years' time when some of these super dense places start to fall apart and need to be rebuilt. There's going to be some real challenges there. I also think, of course, we've got a housing crisis. Of course, there needs to be a supply side solution to that. Of course, we've got to ramp up supply, but we can't not look at demand, and that troubles me about the whole debate. We're not looking at the tax incentives that turn housing into a commodity. It is not just a commodity, it is more than that. And so we've got to stop incentivising people who already have a house to buy more houses until everyone who wants a house has a house, and then we can incentivise people to buy more houses. It seems to me that we've got the incentives wrong.
I'll come back. Oh, go on, you. Do you want to go?
I just want to say, green infrastructure is a network. It's an interconnected network. So like how we plan freeways and highways, green should be throughout the cities, right? It's not an ad hoc park here or a green tree there. It's the whole system, right? So the more dense we go, the more we would need green infrastructure to sustain human life. And so it's not, yes, we need the housing, but let's think different of how we supply that from the start right to the end. It's not bringing in the landscape at the end. It's thinking from the start. How do we design it, the materials, the construction, the architecture, the planning? The whole process needs a rethink.
Yeah. All right, great. I'll take that. And Remy, I was going to ask... round of applause for that. That's great. What do you think? Is this the density versus the green infrastructure question? How do you reconcile?
No competition. I think it's not one or the other. They can actually be done, there's no threshold for density, something. It's always evolved. It's, can say, context specific and so forth. But for us, when it comes to city or urban development, we have this type of principle that help us navigate that type of positions. For instance, we think that a city had to be compact. And when you add to the compactness, which can be seen in some contexts as density, as connectivity. When you have places that are connected, it might not be as compact or dense, but they are connected in one way or the other through green, blue, or whatever services, infrastructure, and they have to be integrated. So when you start putting those principles of making city work for all, then it starts making sense that you can still have all these elements. And the integration is about integrating people and the green within the same space. And I think in our earlier discussion, Anthony, you shared the example of Singapore, which is a highly dense, I would say, city or country in some respect, but highly green in terms of their infrastructure services and solutions they provide. So they are not necessarily in competition. I think it's still doable. Now on the housing question, of course, is a perennial thing in Australia. We know the issue of affordability that we are all concerned about, but we have to be injecting, as part of this discussion, how do we make that greener, the element of the roof that Honorable Rob had mentioned. So some of this element had to come at the fore of the discussion when we talk about housing, not only in terms of the cost, because greening has a cost, but relative to benefit, the cost benefits is in favor of greening and nature.
Great. So that last bit there, that was for the accountants in the room. Cost benefit analysis looking really good. Everyone else is saying we can do it together. Density and green don't have to fight each other. They are a companion piece. They do work in harmony. If we're clever about bringing those things together at the outset, that's what I think what I'm summarising there. They should be.
And can I add from a innovation perspective, there's plenty of solutions out there that will add a lot of nature in the city without touching anything into housing or density. there's plenty of opportunities to make it happen if we allow it to happen.
Yeah. When I talk about sustainability to students, I often say the science was in the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, 70s and 80s. The science of sustainability was in. The technology, the engineering of sustainability, that was in somewhere like the 90s and the noughties. So that leaves us only, back to the very beginning, with the issue about sustainability that we haven't solved yet is the cultural side. And that's exactly where the panel went this evening. I think when you all opened up to that question, we have love, we have poetry, we have all those very human sorts of responses here. So rather than a technical conversation, we've ended up with a very human conversation, and that seems to be where the problems lie. But also, what I'm hearing from the panel, that's where all the opportunities are too. Yeah? So with that, we're going to draw this evening's procedure to a close. I hope you are going to leave the room with some, certainly hopefully thinking about what your next action will be. And hopefully outside with the bar, you can have a conversation with some people who are like-minded and maybe something will spark up out of that. Wouldn't that be amazing? We will be out there in the bar probably later on, so come and tap us on the shoulder if you want to have a chat. But with that, thank you very much, dear audience, for joining us this evening. And I would like to invite you up to the podium to say some thank yous. I will sit down.
Thank you, Anthony. So I've got this wonderful task to say thank you to some incredible people. So this event has been in the making for quite some time, a lot of hours went into it. So when we started, we asked the panel members to all share with us something about themselves. Remember all those questions? Something about yourself, your perspectives, how you think about things. We said it would be confidential, but I'm just going to blabber it all out now. I fed this information to ChatGPT, like any responsible academic would do. And I asked ChatGPT, so summarize the superpowers of our panelists, right? So this was based on what you wrote about yourself and ChatGPT's interpretation. So with that, a huge thank you and appreciation to our panel members for sharing their superpowers. So firstly, Rob, our harmony hero, who works his magic to create amazing cities where everything and everyone fits together perfectly. That can be a new LinkedIn status. Jermaine, our nature ninja, who brings nature back to the city, making urban life fresh and exciting. Remy, our global city wizard, who transforms cities all over the world, making them better places for everyone. Thanks, Remy. And our host, Anthony, design guru, who puts the grand into architecture, turning his passion into a wonderful city-changing design. So thank you very much. A small gift for all of you. Remy, you have to watch out for post coming your way soon. And everybody is very curious to know what's in your bags. It's really special. It was designed by students from the Faculty of Design, Architecture and Building. I believe Rob has a matching gift currently on. Also, just a huge thank you to Joe Bosman, Dina Pham, and the incredible UTS team running at the back, who is keeping this event live and coverage globally. It's really an honor to be part of this Global Game Changer series, and a huge salute to UTS management for investing in these conversations and the global engagements. This is wonderful. And then to our audience, our enablers of our visions that we shared here tonight, thank you for turning up and for engaging. With 1,700 registrations, it gives us the confidence that this is a really important topic and we need to be taking this forward. So green infrastructure matters. And a special shout out to our UTS friends that's currently in China, They drew a whole crowd together, and it's watching us on the live stream, so thank you. In closing, I once learned something from one of my students that turned out to be my favorite quote, and it said, "You should never underestimate the power of a small change." So I'm challenging you all tonight, be part of this change, be part of the Green Revolution. Every small act by every one of us can have a big, huge collective impact. So never underestimate the power of a small change. And lastly, to bring it back to Anthony's very first question that he said, why are we not already greening our cities, right? So this is a call to all of you as well. Let's do better. Let's do it together. So thank you, UTS, and thank you to the panel and our host, and thank you to the audience. So let the Green Revolution begin. Thank you. And if I can go, you want to come back?